Godzilla Minus One is a brand new Godzilla feature film from Toho Studios, who of course originated the franchise. They have
Mhm.
been the main arbiters of Godzilla feature films, but we know that Godzilla as a character has been licensed out elsewhere across its
Right.
history as a property, most recently with Legendary Pictures, who are currently in the midst of their MonsterVerse sort of cinematic universe run in America. And so Warner Brothers and Legendary, they have made the Godzilla feature film, King of the Monsters, Godzilla versus Kong. They have Monarch on television right now. So it's a really, really big moment with all of
Yeah.
this Godzilla media happening across various mediums, whether it's in television, live action, animation. There were like animated Netflix movies a few years ago. And
Hmm.
now, again, the originals Toho coming back after 7 years. Their most recent feature film, Shin Godzilla, which came out in 2016, had
Hmm.
heavy praise and great critical reception. They're returning here with a bit of a more traditional take, I would say, on the Godzilla property, sort of taking it back to its roots of where it was established in the 50s. We got a chance to go check this out. They had some exclusive IMAX showings this past weekend during its opening weekend. So, with all that out of the way, man, I'll pass it over to you. What did you think about Godzilla Minus One?
Cinema. Cinema. Nah, this movie is so interesting to me because of course Godzilla has been, I think, part of all of our lives. Even if you don't haven't watched a lot of Godzilla movies or anything, you know who Godzilla is and what Godzilla at least does to some extent, destroying cities and this and that. But Godzilla Minus One, as you said, kind of takes everything back to its roots and its war kind of roots, where in this movie is really about post-war Japan, where Japan's already down and out. I mean, Japan is really going through it. And Godzilla is like, okay, but I'm also here too to cause more destruction. What does that look like for Japan? And how can Japan possibly power through that, man? And what makes this movie so good? It's doing something different that most other Godzilla films do not do, and that is painting a picture and getting us to care about the characters that are on the ground, the humans that are on the ground in this movie. This movie comes in and it kind of reminds me of like the first 10 minutes of, what was that, Godzilla 2013, 2012? When did Godzilla come out? 2011, 20
I think
something,
it's 2013 or
2013. But
14. It was
the
14,
one with
actually.
Bryan Cranston, it was like, oh yeah, Bryan, I think I care about these humans in Godzilla. And then like the characters die. Spoiler alert, the characters die, and there's like, that's it. That's the end of the characterization for the movie. That's what this movie feels like if Bryan Cranston was in that entire movie, or those characters were in that entire movie. That's really what this movie feels like to me, of what would happen in a Godzilla movie where we care about them. And it's everything I feel like a Godzilla movie, I think I always wanted to be, but didn't know it. Does that make sense? Like, I always like Godzilla, I always like what's going on, but you never care about the characters. You're just here to see Godzilla wreck shit. But this they really take the time to get you into the hearts and minds of the people on the ground. This is about a man who is ex-military now, I guess. He is military, and he him he becomes orphaned, and he runs into two other people who are orphaned, a lady who recently became orphaned, and she found a kid who recently became orphaned. They become a family, but he has to work in order to provide for that family. But Godzilla threatens that entire thing. He not only threatens Japan, he threatens the dynamic of this new family and what that looks like. And so, man, I can talk about so many things in this film, but just to keep it short, man, sound amazing, but the look and feel of Godzilla himself is, I love it because he's very scary. Feels like a almost like a horror icon in this movie to me. When you see Godzilla, it's not like, oh shoot, Godzilla's here. It's like, oh shoot, Godzilla's here. It's very different tones and meaning in which Godzilla appears. Godzilla isn't a hero in this movie. Godzilla isn't coming to rectify the earth. It's not 90s Godzilla either. It's not coming to have babies. There's Godzilla's literally here to in some ways to terrorize, to take ownership, to be somewhat of the god that the Godzilla believes that Godzilla is. And so it's just a very frightening feeling. Anytime Godzilla is on the screen, I love that about it. But because you care about the humans, you no longer say, "Oh, Godzilla." You say, "Oh no, please don't kill my favorite people, Godzilla. Please do not kill these characters." And that really hasn't been the case in a lot of older Godzilla films. And so, man, I can't really sing the praises of this movie enough. I think it is exceptional. Again, it's given us stuff to chew on that we really didn't get to chew on before in a Godzilla movie. And they're doing really tremendous, I think, character work here. Last thing I'll say, I think the score is crazy. There was like a lot of times I was like, do y'all hear this? They are going stupid with the music in this movie. And something about this film, it actually feels, because it is Japanese, and I've been watching a ton of anime, it feels very anime like. I was watching it, and there's a lot of moments that are like over dramatized, which, to be honest, is one of my very, very small nitpicks with the movie. There's a couple over the top dramatized moments. I was like, oh, you went slightly too far, but that's okay because it works for a lot of the rest of the film. It really is, I think, an attribution to the film when it does take away from it. And so I found myself just enjoying it again. It feels like a live action anime to me. It was like it really is a journey to go on. So if anybody, you don't even have to be a fan of Godzilla. I think that's one of the things that will make people not want to go see the film. Is like, oh, I don't really like Godzilla. Go see Godzilla. If you like action, if you like character, if you like drama, if you like anime, go see Godzilla -1. And I definitely think you'll walk away feeling rewarded.
So I've had enough time to think about this, but Godzilla -1 is one of, if not the greatest Godzilla film ever made. And it's not really even close just because of everything that they go after in this movie from a narrative perspective, from an emotional perspective, from a pure kaiju monster movie perspective, from an action perspective, a drama perspective, historical. There's so much wrapped up into this. And Godzilla -1 for me represents a Godzilla movie that's probably most in conversation with the original Godzilla film from 1954, because that movie is ultimately an allegory for atomic energy and what that ultimately means for the world, how it's ultimately changed the world. 1954 is right after the events of World War II when the atomic bomb was introduced. Shout out to Oppenheimer. And you get to Godzilla -1, which is now tapping into that same spirit and energy, because, spoiler alert, people, Godzilla is not friendly in this movie. He is not saving the earth. He is very much vengeful, rageful, uncontrollable, the scary godlike presence that he's often been depicted as. And even the opening moments of this movie where you first see Godzilla, not even in his full form, it felt so much like Jurassic Park, the terror that you would experience if you saw like a T-Rex, if you went to Jurassic Park and somehow the T-Rex escaped. That whole sequence is very much reflected in the opening sequence of Godzilla -1. And that just sets the tone for everything else that happens, because all of the Godzilla stuff is great. But what does separate this film, what separates Godzilla -1 from the rest of the pack, is the fact that the human drama is so captivating. And I know us as American audiences who have seen Godzilla films, especially these recent legendary pictures, we often say, let's get less of the character work and get more of the fighting, get more of the action between the Titans and Godzilla, which I think is totally fair, especially with what those films are going after. But the Japanese, who obviously originated this franchise, they've always injected human drama. They've always injected character and story. But even with them always prioritizing that in all of these films, it's not always the most interesting. A lot of the times you get a bunch of grown men in conference rooms talking. That's really what it ends up being for most of those movies. Sometimes it works better than other times, but here, because this is set post-World War II and you're firmly establishing the characters' experiences based on that traumatic incident for Japan during that particular time, you've already injected them with the sense of relatability that we don't often get with other characters featured throughout these movies, because everybody knows about World War II. We know the damage and the profound destruction that took place all across the world, especially in Japan, because of those events and the atomic age and what that ultimately meant for that country during that particular time. And now you get the fallout of all of that. And to know that this Godzilla is directly an offshoot because of that atomic energy and is now this formidable, unstoppable presence in Japan that's wreaking all havoc. it's saying so many different things, and it's actually talking a lot about what we can control and the threat that looms ultimately with having access to atomic weapons and what that means for
Mhm.
society. And then that more personal character story, which turns into a story of redemption and somewhat vengeance, and ultimately closing a certain chapter of your life and finding that closure, becomes at the central heartbeat of this film. But beyond the story and the narrative perspective of this, from a technical perspective, this is also just extremely, extremely impressive stuff. I mean, the things that you see in this movie visually, how they represent and bring Godzilla to life, it is the most awe-inspiring, terrifying imagery that I've seen in a kaiju movie in a very, very long time. There's one sequence in particular in the movie where Godzilla is swimming in the water chasing after a small boat. The
Ooh.
imagery of that scene alone is like pure nightmare fuel. It is
Yep.
absolutely terrifying. You feel the emotional stakes, you feel the sense of urgency, you feel the danger. That
Mhm.
presents Godzilla in a way that we just rarely see him, as this unstoppable killing machine that has some of the most destructive weapons at his disposal. What they do with his back dorsal plates in this
Yeah.
movie, I've never seen it before, but it's so genius. It's so brilliant. And then when you see that atomic nuclear energy come out of his mouth, y'all, these scenes they're terrifying. They're absolutely terrifying. I mean, think about, literally, I'm just going to make a direct comparison here, but think about the tension that Christopher Nolan injected into the Trinity test sequence in Oppenheimer. If you've seen that
Mhm.
movie, if you saw the build up to that sequence and
Mhm.
how just pressed for time they were, but also just frantic and panicked everybody was, because you don't know what the fuck is going to happen.
Yep.
I felt those same emotions here. And then on the other side of it, when you see the fallout, when you see the destructive capabilities, it's like, oh yeah, this is doomsday. If this happens
Mhm.
again, it's over for everybody. There's no way we
Everybody.
can let this go down. And those moments are just built up with so much dramatic tension and weight that you just never really experience in these kaiju movies, man. It is really awesome. It's really awesome to see. It's incredible. And the way that they present Godzilla here, it's just so frightening. The look of him, as you said, it's really an ingenious design to keep that scale intact, but also to allow him
Mhm.
to move and be a little bit more flexible than I
Yep.
think sometimes we see him. And I'm just impressed across the board. I can't believe that they made this movie for $15 million.
15.
$15 million American money,
15.
and it looks this way. It looks better
Come on.
than a lot of these $200-300 million movies that these American studios are producing. It's like, what the fuck are we doing with this money?
What
Really,
are we
y'all? Like, what are we
doing?
doing? Because you can do all of those tricks and all of that magic and throw all that money on the screen, but if you don't have an excellent story at the center of it, with which this
Mhm.
movie does, you're probably going to fail every time, because no amount of CGI, no amount of effects can substitute for something that feels like an emotionally resonant story that you can connect to, that you remember, and that you think about and ask questions about. And this movie is achieving so many things, and it's doing so much. I want to ask you, because of the moment that we are in right now. I'm watching Monarch on Apple TV. That's a MonsterVerse show, and we got the MonsterVerse movies. We're going to talk about this Godzilla Kong trailer later as well. And now Toho coming back in full force, saying like, "Well, don't forget, this is our creature. This is our creation, and nobody can do it better than us." I mean, what does this say to you about the state of the Godzilla franchise? Just what can be achieved, and the fact that we are getting a variety of tones. With Monarch, it's very much a sci-fi sort of
Mhm.
conspiracy television show. The legendary pictures are tapping into a fantastical side that
Mhm.
probably only an American studio can afford. But now Toho is presenting something that is so much more grounded in
Yeah.
reality, in real life. How do you feel about just the state of Godzilla as a franchise, and the fact that we are getting so many different looks at what this particular character can do across multiple mediums?
I love it. I really think there if there's a story or there's some crazy, I think, technical aspect and look that you want to take at a given character in Godzilla, then you should be able to take it. Um, you just have to make it good. That's really all it is. Even the MonsterVerse stuff, it can have big budget again, but is it good? And I think that's the point that we're trying to make with Godzilla minus one, is you can make it good for 15 mil. And you don't have to have this over the top budget thing to make it good. And but I like the idea of having multiple looks. I love part of the reason I love this movie is, of course, it's it was a crazy thing to say, but it's grounded, right? It's more grounded. A lot of the other Godzilla, not well, a lot of the recent Godzilla films, and it gives you, I think, just a different look of what Godzilla could be versus, oh, we're doing Godzilla versus Kong. This is a big CGI battle in the middle of the city. This is what it's going to look like, which is fine. And I actually think there is room for that to be great too. I think we can make those things great. We can get I've been calling it in my head like more rampage feeling, you know what I
Yeah,
mean? More
for sure.
rampage feeling Godzilla. I think there's room for that though. I think they can make that good, but it's really whatever take you wanna look, or whatever look you want to get, just make it good. And I think that's really it in the argument. You just said Monarch is doing more sci-fi, fantastical. You got to have some money in order to grind that out. That's fine, but make it good. And that's really it. I'm okay with both looks. And eventually, unfortunately, sometimes one doesn't work. Sometimes the grounded doesn't always work. You just said Japan has been doing the character stuff for a long time. It just, if it's a bunch of dudes talking about military stuff in a room, pointing at the board, telling us, all right, this is what we're gonna do versus Godzilla. This is where the energy is coming from. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, you can only do that so many times, and so again, I think there's room for it all, but it just has to be good.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing. We're in this new, for lack of a better term, we're in sort of a new renaissance period for Godzilla, even as a property, as a character. I mean, the fact that this kaiju creation for 60 years has been able to transform and adapt and say different things in different eras. It's really impressive. You wouldn't expect that out of just a creature that can't speak. Like, there's only so many iterations of Godzilla that we've seen. Like, there's consistent things. He's typically a certain type of size. He's typically a certain
Mhm.
height. He has the atomic energy. He has the dorsal plates. Like, he looks a certain type of way. There have obviously been deviations, but now we're seeing all different sides of it, and I welcome it, because that just kind of, I think, speaks to the health of where the franchise is, and the capabilities. If you have an interesting filmmaker who has a take, who has
Mhm.
something to say, and actually goes after something that can be a little bit different compared to what we've seen, like the director here, he obviously wanted to make the human drama as compelling as the creature feature. He knew that was very, very important to him, and he achieved that in spades. And not everybody goes after that, and we have a place for the more fantastical stuff where
Mhm.
Legendary is saying, like, yeah, we have entire sequences that are just full CGI. All right, that's fine, as long as it's compelling, and I show up and that's my expectation. I know I'm going here for just pure monster action, them punching each other throughout the course of the movie. So
Bet.
be it. That's cool. Just make it great, make it really, really good and
Mhm.
exceptional. Then I'm going to be on board for it. But I think it's fascinating that, as the most persistent and probably the most popular movie monster in history, even till this day, we can say that there's a Godzilla movie that might be head and shoulders better than the rest of them 60 years
Yes.
later. And I think that
Oof.
Godzilla minus one might just well represent that. But folks, those are all of our thoughts on Godzilla minus one. If you've checked out this new movie, definitely hit us up and let us know what you think.